The fantasy football playoffs are here, and a lot of you guys are entering in fantasy football playoff challenges. Well, there's a lot of different rules with this. Navigating whether or not to use a player during a certain week is a big time adjustment for you guys. And I want to provide you guys the most borderline start and sit advice players so you can plug and play some good options this week, have no regrets, and have a lot of good options down the stretch here, all the way into Super Bowl weekend. So let's get into this video here on Blitz Fantasy Football. What's going on, everybody? I'm Blitz Link, and we are getting into the Fantasy Football Playoff Challenge advice. We are running one on our website, $25 buy-in, 10 different winners. It is going to be a great experience, so if you guys want to hop in on that as well. But let's get right in the video and talk about some of the quarterbacks that I'm targeting and avoiding this week. And we're going to start with Jordan Love for the Green Bay Packers. Love is a great play, returning this week from injury and his concussion. Finished the year with 3,300 yards, 23 touchdowns, and just 6 interceptions this season. He also had a very good performance earlier this year against the Chicago Bears, 234 yards and 3 touchdowns in their Week 14 matchup before getting knocked out with a concussion in the last time these two teams played. When they did play in that last matchup, Love also looked very good as well. The Chicago Bears this year have been one of the most generous matchups for quarterbacks. Have given up the fourth most passing touchdowns, allowed the third most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks during the regular season. Overall, Jordan Love is a low risk player, as the Green Bay Packers are a 7 seed. Even if they beat the Chicago Bears, they are not likely to make a deep run this postseason. Jordan Love is a great matchup to cash in on that, and ultimately would be a great pick to throw in your lineup and have a solid day against a struggling Chicago secondary that has allowed a ton of yards and fantasy production to the quarterback position this year. The other guy I like is Trevor Lawrence for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I do think the Jaguars are a sneaky team this postseason and can make a deep run into the playoffs, but they are also facing one of the toughest first round matchups in the Buffalo Bills, who have been there and have a ton of playoff experience in the past few years. I'm not saying I think Jacksonville is going to lose this game, but Lawrence is the type of player that you can take a risk on this week with how good he has been to close the season. Since week 14, he's led the NFL in pass rate over expectation. Over that span, he's also ranked third in passing yards per game, second in adjusted net yards per attempt, and tied second in passing touchdowns. He's averaged the most fantasy points per game during that stretch as well. The Buffalo Bills are a very tough matchup on paper, and they've limited opposing fantasy quarterback production a ton this year. But you look at that Denver matchup a few weeks back and how good Trevor Lawrence was in that matchup. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be in for another strong performance. And whether or not you think Josh Allen or Trevor Lawrence wins this game, you take a risk on one of those guys and get their upside week while they are still available, and maybe hope the other one wins the game and you could use them another week. Quarterbacks that I'm sitting: Brock Purdy for the San Francisco 49ers. This might be the only opportunity that you can use Brock Purdy. And while I am locking in Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle in a lot of my brackets, I don't think Purdy is the player that you want to take a risk on this week. I mean, you saw last week against Seattle, 127 yards with no touchdowns and an interception. Also got hurt later in that game. There's no Trent Williams last week. Who knows what his status is going to be this week? Ricky Pearsall is trending towards not playing this week as well. And he was great down the stretch, 32 fantasy points in each of weeks 15 through 17. He was that good with the 6 point passing touchdown format. It is just the Philadelphia Eagles have been dominant on the defensive side of the ball against quarterbacks this year, allowed fewer passing touchdowns than any other defense in the regular season. Have only surrendered 7 passing touchdowns since week 7. The Eagles have a great defense, and it is going to be an uphill battle for Brock Purdy to have a solid day in fantasy football. The final guy is Justin Herbert for the Los Angeles Chargers, and Herbert might be a great NFL quarterback, but the Chargers are a 7 seed. A lot of people might be trying to plug and play Herbert. It is a bad option. He scored fewer than 16.5 fantasy points in 6 of his last 7 games, and he did have a strong outcome against Dallas, but Dallas has just been a bad defense the entire season. Also concerning, the Chargers have been brutal on the offensive line, third most sacks allowed in the league high, 129 quarterback hits. They get the Patriots that have only allowed one quarterback to score more than 15.6 fantasy points since week 11, and that was Josh Allen. So I fully expect that Justin Herbert is not going to have a massive day in fantasy football. As far as the running backs go, there is a plethora of options that you can plug and play this week. The two that I love the most that are borderline is DeAndre Swift for the Chicago Bears. Swift has been on fire since week 14, handled 56% of that rushing attempts for the Bears, also having a 44% route participation rate. He has 62.6 rushing yards per game and 4 rushing touchdowns during that stretch. Sorry, Swift has topped 20 points in 3 of his last 6 games as well. And the Green Bay defense has been very vulnerable over the last few weeks. They allowed the 8 total touchdowns and eighth most fantasy points per games to running backs since week 10. We saw Derrick Henry 2 weeks ago go for over 200 yards and 4 touchdowns in a big game for this Green Bay Packers team. Ultimately, I think Swift is going to be the biggest beneficiary of this matchup and have a big day in fantasy football. The other guy that I'm starting is on fire, and it is Kenneth Gainwell, likely a one and done candidate as well. Since week 11, he has been a baller, posted a 58.8% route share with a 17.5% target share. He's caught 44 passes during that span. He's basically like a modified wide receiver. He's exceeded 30 receiving yards in 3 of his last 4 games and has topped 16.2 fantasy points in 6 of his last 8 games. It's a solid matchup against the Houston Texans, where 8 running backs have scored at least 7.3 fantasy points alone on receiving production. So there is a little bit of value and hole in that Texans defense in the passing game where Kenneth Gainwell can have a nice day in fantasy. As far as running backs, I'm sitting Rico Dowdle. There's no reason that he should be in your lineup this week, even if you are not taking a risk at running back. Over those last 5 games, he's only produced more than 9.9 points just once, with 3 straight single-digit performances. He's totaled fewer than 10 carries in 2 of his last 3 games. Clearly, him and Chuba Hubbard are in this backfield split. And last time these two teams matched up, Chuba Hubbard outpaced him in rushing yards and added a receiving touchdown in that win over the Rams. The Rams, while they've shown a little bit of holes in the defensive side of the ball as of late, they've only allowed 6 rushing touchdowns the entire season to running backs. There's just no good path for Rico Dowdle to fantasy production this week. The other guy I'm sitting is Woody Marks for the Houston Texans. Listen, Woody has had great volume throughout the course of this season. 196 carries, 700 yards, 200 yards receiving as well. But he also is only averaging 3.59 yards per carry, which is 48th among 49 total qualified running backs. He's seen at least 17 touches in 6 contests over his last 7 games, but has only scored more than 11 points once during that stretch. It's not ideal. I mean, the Pittsburgh defense is also one of the best run defenses in football. I don't see a world where Woody Marks turns in a solid day in fantasy. As far as wide receivers go, Teteroa McMillan is a guy that I need to get inserted into my lineup this week. He's been a really strong rookie this year, finished wide receiver 15 in scoring, had over 1,000 receiving yards on 122 targets. His production, while it's been in a large part tied to the struggles of Bryce Young this year, the matchups have been a big target for him as well. The Rams defense has allowed the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers from weeks 10 through 17, and the 2nd most points to perimeter wideouts. He's already burned the secondary for a 43-yard touchdown earlier on this year. I think Teteroa McMillan is the player that I want to get in my lineup, knowing that he's likely a one and done, and I can get the solid production out of him this week. Christian Watson, another guy that I absolutely love this week. He's been one of the more underrated players in the NFL in the second half of the season. Among receivers with at least 200 routes, he ranks top 20 in air yard share, yards per game, targets per route run, and receiving touchdowns. It has been awesome to see. He scored 18 points in 3 of his last 5 games, including a 25-point performance against the Chicago secondary in Week 14. The Bears defense ranks 27th in yards per completion allowed. Those big plays will be open, and Christian Watson will be the biggest beneficiary of them against the Bears this week. And on the flip side of that matchup, there's no chance that I am starting Romo Dunze this week in any sort of fantasy formats or DFS formats. He was struggling before his injury. 8.3 points or fewer in 3 straight games, finding the end zone only once since week 4. Modest production to close this year. 600 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns overall. Luther Burden and Colston Loveland have elevated their play over the last few weeks, and that likely results in a target share dip for Romo Dunze down the stretch here. The wildcard matchup against Green Bay is solid, but his receiving prop is only at 37.5 receiving yards. I don't expect him to have a monster day this week in fantasy. The other guy, Juwan Jennings, with Ricky Pearsall out, he has been a strong wide receiver down the stretch here in fantasy football. He scored 6 touchdowns in his final 6 games. He's also earned at least 5 targets in 10 of his last 11 games. The bad part, though, he's going against the Eagles defense that's allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points from weeks 10 through 17. Not ideal by any means right there. And then no receiver is top 14.5 points against Philadelphia since week 13. So it is a brutal matchup. And I don't see a world where Juwan Jennings has a great day in fantasy production. The final position, the tight end group, you got Dalton Schultz for the Houston Texans, that I think is a great play this week. He's been CJ Stroud's safety blanket, set a career high in receptions this year, and he had 777 receiving yards. He's at least had 5 catches in 10 different games, and he scored at least 11.3 points in 3 straight games. Looking ahead at this week, he gets the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends this year, averaging 66.8 receiving yards allowed. Ultimately, Dalton Schultz has been on fire. The matchup's great. Go get Dalton Schultz in your lineup. He's going to be in for a solid day. Colston Loveland is another tight end that I'm firing up in my lineups this week. He has been one of the hottest tight ends to close the season. Since week 12, he ranks tight end 7 in points per game, where he's averaging a 25% air yard share and nearly 55 receiving yards per game. He scored over 20 points in each of the last 2 weeks, which has been very encouraging. And Green Bay has been very vulnerable against tight ends over the last few weeks as well. So Colston Loveland should be a strong play this week in the wild card round. As far as tight ends, I'm sitting Brenton Strange for the Jacksonville Jaguars, another guy that came onto the scene as of late, and he scored 14.9 points in 2 of his last 3 games. He just gets that Buffalo Bills matchup that I have been avoiding all season long. The Bills have held tight ends to just 35.5 receiving yards per game, and there's not been many guys that have scored touchdowns against them. I have a hard time seeing Brenton Strange having a monster day in fantasy this week. And then the final guy, Dalton Kincaid, on the flip side of it. Kincaid has scored under 8 points in 4 of his last 5 games. Not ideal by any means. He's still struggling with knee issues, and it has kept him off the field, limiting his workload over the end of the season. Now, the Jacksonville Jaguars are a great matchup, 10th most tight end points allowed, but that is not going to help me put Dalton Kincaid in my lineup because he has truly been a weak losing player in your lineup down the stretch here. All in all, though, guys, these are the playoff challenge start and sit advice video for you guys. Drop any sort of questions you have down in that comment section below. Make sure you tune into our playoff challenge as well. Hope to see some of you guys in there. Hit that subscribe button for more Blitz Sports Media content, and I'll catch you guys next time.